Knowing spent 8 years in development hell, passed through 2 directors who never made it, and arrived in 2009 as one of the most divisive science fiction films of its decade. Directed by Alex Proyas and starring Nicolas Cage, Rose Byrne, Chandler Canterbury, and a pre-fame Liam Hemsworth. It cost $50 million and grossed $186.5 million. Here are 14 facts you never knew. 14. The Donnie Darko sequel. That wasn't the film ends with Earth destroyed, the children carried away by alien beings, and Nicolas Cage dying alone in the ruins of his home. It's bleak, uncompromising, and unlike almost anything else in mainstream sci-fi, but the story that became Knowing was never meant for Alex Proyas. When novelist Ryan Douglas Pearson sold his original concept to Columbia Pictures in 2001, a time capsule filled with prophecies ending in the letters EEE, standing for everyone else. The studio attached Richard Kelly as director. This would have been Kelly's direct follow-up to Donnie Darko. The DNA was identical. A reluctant hero decoding cryptic signs, pointing toward an unstoppable apocalypse. Kelly's version would have been far darker and far more ambiguous. Columbia and Kelly eventually parted ways. Rod Lurie came and went next. The project collapsed into turnaround entirely. When Escape Artists revived it, the script was rewritten from scratch. The ending that wiped out humanity survived. Everything Richard Kelly would have built around it disappeared completely. 13. The script spent 8 years in development and passed through 2 other directors. Ryan Douglas Pearson wrote the original Knowing screenplay and sold it to Columbia Pictures around 2001. The studio attached Rod Lurie, the director of The Contender, to direct it first. He departed. Then Richard Kelly, fresh off Donnie Darko, was attached. He left too. The project sat in Columbia's development library, going nowhere, until it was placed in turnaround and picked up by Escape Artists. Styles White and Juliet Snowden rewrote the script substantially. Alex Proyas came aboard in February 2005 and brought in Stuart Hazeldine for an additional rewrite before production began. By the time cameras rolled in Melbourne in March 2008, the script had passed through 5 writers and spent the better part of a decade waiting for a director willing to commit to its ending. Most of them weren't. 12. Boston was actually Melbourne, Australia. Knowing is set in the Boston area, MIT, suburban Massachusetts, New England architecture and atmosphere throughout. It was filmed entirely in Melbourne, Australia. Production took place at Docklands Studios, Melbourne, across a 3-month principal photography schedule, beginning March the 25th, 2008. Melbourne's locations were dressed and photographed specifically to approximate the visual texture of the American Northeast. The production used the Red 1 4K digital camera, one of the first major studio productions to do so, which director Alex Proyas credited with compressing the schedule significantly. A film whose entire narrative is rooted in American geography, American institutions, and a very specific sense of American suburbia was constructed from the other side of the world by an Australian director who had already used the same approach on I, Robot. Melbourne stood in for Boston without anyone in either city commenting on the substitution. 11. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Almost nobody agreed with him. Roger Ebert reviewed Knowing on its release in March 2009 and gave it 4 stars out of 4. He called it among the best science fiction films he had seen. Frightening, suspenseful, intelligent, and when it needed to be, rather awesome. He praised Alex Proyas' confident storytelling and the film's willingness to follow its premise to a genuinely committed conclusion. Almost nobody else agreed. The critical consensus landed at 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. The ending, and which divided audiences sharply between those who found it audacious and those who found it absurd, was the primary fault line in every review. Ebert's 4-star assessment became one of the most cited examples of a major critic standing alone on a film. The rest of the profession had largely rejected. He defended the review until his death. The film still has a 6.2 on IMDb. The gap between Ebert's response and everyone else's has never fully been explained. 10. Nicolas Cage based his performance on his own father. Nicolas Cage played John Kuestler, an MIT astrophysicist and widowed father whose academic relationship with the universe is fundamentally altered by what he discovers in the time capsule. When asked publicly about his research for the role, Cage's answer was specific and brief. He said he had grown up with a professor, and that was all the research he had ever needed. His father, August Coppola, brother of Francis Ford Coppola, was a professor of comparative literature at California State University, Long Beach. Cage had spent his childhood watching an academic man navigate the world, and he carried that observation directly into the role without further preparation. The performance that critics either praised as grounded or dismissed as typically Cage-ian was built from a childhood memory rather than from any formal character preparation. The astrophysicist on screen was his father, wearing different clothes at the end of the world 9. This was Liam Hemsworth's first film. Liam Hemsworth's first theatrical film credit is Knowing. He plays a small supporting role with limited screen time, a brief presence in the film's suburban sequences that required nothing like the physical demands his later career would make on him. In 2009, Hemsworth was a 19-year-old Australian actor with no significant international credits. His casting was a matter of geography as much as anything else. The film was being made in Melbourne, and Australian actors filled the supporting ensemble. 2 years later, he was cast as Gale Hawthorne in the Hunger Games franchise, which made him a global name. The first film he appeared in was a science fiction thriller about the end of the world. The franchise that made him famous was a science fiction thriller about a different kind of end. The continuity of genre was not planned, it simply held. 8. The Plane Crash was shot as a single continuous sequence, the sequence in which a passenger aircraft crashes on a highway near John Custer's car. One of the film's most viscerally effective disaster set pieces is designed and executed as a single continuous shot. No cuts. The camera follows Custer from inside his vehicle through the window, tracking the aircraft as it descends, and then stays with the aftermath in an unbroken movement through the wreckage, the fire, and the survivors. The sequence required careful planning between director Alex Proyas, cinematographer Simon Dugan, and the visual effects team to ensure that the practical elements and the digital additions would hold together without the safety net of an edit. The result was praised even by critics, who dismissed the film around it, a piece of filmmaking craft that several reviewers described as genuinely harrowing and unlike anything they had seen in a contemporary disaster film. A single, uncut shot of something that didn't happen made it feel entirely real. 7. The film's ending is directly drawn from the Book of Ezekiel. The conclusion of knowing how the alien beings revealed as angels, the children carried to a new world, the earth destroyed by solar fire, the image of a new tree on an alien landscape draws directly from the Book of Ezekiel in the Hebrew Bible. Ezekiel's vision of heavenly beings with wheels of fire arriving to carry out divine judgment and select survivors for a new creation maps onto the film's final act with a precision that is not accidental. Director Alex Proyas acknowledged the biblical framework in interviews, describing the film's central argument as a question about whether what appears to be extraterrestrial intelligence might be something older and more specific than science allows. The alien visitors who have been whispering to children across 50 years are, in the film's own logic, the same beings that appeared to the prophet in the 6th century BCE. The film that most reviewers dismissed as a Nicolas Cage disaster movie ends with the Book of Ezekiel. 6. The director wanted to emulate The Exorcist. Alex Proyas had a specific tonal reference when developing Knowing. He wanted to make a film that did what William Friedkin's The Exorcist had done in 1973, take a fantastical supernatural premise and embed it inside a realistic domestic environment with enough genuine human weight that the horror felt personal rather than spectacular. The Exorcist's power came from the specificity of Reagan's family, the ordinary love between a mother and daughter that the supernatural intrusion threatened to destroy. Proyas wanted Kessler's grief, his relationship with his son, and his academic skepticism about meaning to carry the same weight. The disaster sequences were not the film's center. The man losing and then finding his understanding of the universe was. Whether the film achieved that ambition was the fault line across which every critical response divided. Proyas had aimed at The Exorcist. The reviews suggested he had landed somewhere considerably lower. He remained publicly proud of what he had built regardless. 5. The numbers code contains every major disaster between 1959 and 2009. The sheet of numbers that Lucinda Embry fills during the 1959 time capsule ceremony contains encoded information about every major disaster in the 50 years that follow, dates, coordinates, and death tolls, embedded in a sequence that looks like random digits to everyone who sees it before John Kessler works out the pattern. The production team constructed the code with genuine internal consistency. Every number on the sheet corresponds correctly to the disaster it references, and the disasters themselves were drawn from real historical events of the period. September 11th's date and death toll appear on the sheet. The Indian Ocean tsunami appears. The code works as a real code for anyone who cross-references it against the film's disaster timeline. A prop that appears on screen for a few minutes was built with the same rigor as the film's plot. The production had done the math. The numbers are right. 4. The ending divided test audiences so severely that some had considered changing it. The film's conclusion, the Earth destroyed, the children saved, the aliens confirmed as something beyond extraterrestrial, generated severe division in test screenings. Summit Entertainment, the film's distributor, was concerned enough about the audience response to the ending that the possibility of changing it was discussed. Alex Proyas refused. The ending was the reason he had taken the project. The specific theological commitment of a film willing to follow its premise to its logical conclusion was what had distinguished Knowing from every other disaster film he had been offered. A version that pulled back from the destruction that found a way for Nicolas Cage's character to survive, or for the ending to resolve more conventionally, was not the film he had agreed to make. Summit released the ending Proyas had shot. The audience divided exactly as the test screenings had predicted. The film grossed $186.5 million anyway. Some endings don't need to be liked, they need to be felt. 3. The film was shot in 3 months using digital cinema technology. The entire principal photography of Knowing was completed in approximately 3 months, an unusually compressed schedule for a $50 million production with significant visual effects requirements. Director Alex Proyas credited the Red One 4K digital camera as the primary reason the schedule was achievable. Shooting digitally rather than on film eliminated the delays associated with processing dailies, allowed immediate review of footage, and reduced the physical infrastructure required on set. The Red One was a relatively new system in 2008. Its use on a major studio production was still unusual enough to attract comment from the technical press. Knowing was among the early examples of a large-scale genre film shot entirely in digital 4K. And the production's experience with the format contributed to the industry conversation about digital cinema that was already underway. The technology that kept the film on schedule was the same technology that was in the process of replacing the medium that had defined cinema for 100 years. 2. Ben Mendelsohn appeared before his international breakthrough. Ben Mendelsohn plays Gordon Silber, John Kessler's colleague and friend, in Knowing. In 2009, Mendelsohn was a well-regarded Australian actor with strong domestic credits but minimal international recognition. His global profile changed substantially after Animal Kingdom in 2010 and then accelerated through Bloodline, Rogue One, and The Dark Knight Rises. By the time most international audiences encountered Mendelsohn as a significant screen presence, he had already been in a Nicolas Cage disaster film about the end of the world. His role in Knowing is consistent with his later work, specific, grounded, and doing more with limited screen time than the part technically requires. Australia kept producing actors that the rest of the world discovered late. Knowing was made by an Australian director in an Australian city with an Australian cast that included 2 men the world was about to figure out. The film failed critically. The careers around it did not. 1. The film predicted its own critical reception in its opening scene. The first image of Knowing is a child staring directly into the sun. The whispered voices she hears are telling her something true, something coming. something that the world around her is not equipped to receive. She writes it down. Nobody believes her. 50 years later, a man finds what she wrote and spends the rest of the film trying to convince everyone around him that it means exactly what it says. They don't believe him either. The film's central dramatic engine is a truth that arrives fully formed and is systematically dismissed by every institution and every person it reaches. The critical reception of Knowing mapped onto that premise with an uncomfortable accuracy. A film about the refusal to accept uncomfortable truths was released to reviewers who found its conclusions unacceptable. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Everyone else moved on. The numbers were right the whole time. The people doing the counting just didn't want to look, and there you have it. 13 weird facts about Knowing, a film that spent 8 years waiting for a director willing to keep its ending, shot Boston and Melbourne, divided every test audience that saw it, and gave Roger Ebert a 4-star review that nobody else agreed with. Which fact hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that knew more than anyone wanted them to. Until next time,